What's up, Tim?
What's up? What's up?
How we doing?
Not too bad. One of those weeks. Yeah,
Yeah. You've been staying busy?
yeah. No, definitely.
It's out
Can,
there
can count.
twiddling your thumbs, huh? Just looking for something.
No, I can count on my fingers the amount of sleep I've gotten over the last 3-4 days. It's been one of those type of weeks.
Yeah, just a few things going on, I guess. I suppose I don't even know where to start. Where would you rank the events of this week in terms of importance? If I give you keeping the recruiting class together, Tony White leaving, Terrance Knighton leaving, Dana Holgerson getting locked down, or transfer portal exits?
Weirdly enough, I think the two most important developments of the week are Knighton leaving and the portal exits, because those are the two things where I felt the most unsure about. Like, I don't know where Nebraska goes after losing Terrance Knighton. I trust Matt Rhule because he's had a sound defense everywhere he's been, specifically up front. He's had a sound defensive front, and he's made good defensive line coach hires. But Knighton had a special relationship with a lot of those guys in that room, which is, obvious through social media, obvious through what we've seen over the past 2 years, and obvious with the portal exits, as a result of his departure. Tony White leaving was somewhat expected. Again, those portal departures, though, some of those guys unexpected. Losing Emmett Johnson yesterday, that's just a tough one. That's one where, there are other schools in the mix already. They're trying to get him, to come to their program. There's a couple of those things. I was talking to some schools about Princewell, and talking to some evaluators about Princewell. They see Princewell as a guy that's going to be one of the top guys in the portal, regardless of position. And he didn't have a productive year for Nebraska, but you watch the tape, and schools watch the tape, and they're really intrigued by a long, bendy pass rusher with the explosive ability that he has. And so I think those two, in terms of what affects Nebraska the most, I think losing Knighton and losing those guys to the portal, because keeping the class together, I thought was impressive. But, there's a handful of guys, I think 10-ish guys in this class that I think have a chance to contribute early. Ultimately, it won't really, really affect Nebraska all that much. Obviously, Cortez Mills will, Isaiah Mosey will, Christian Jones and Dawson Merritt have a chance to impact Nebraska. And then on the Tony White stuff, I think that comes in last just because I kind of figured he was leaving this offseason one way or the other.
When you take a look at kind of so the portal deal is interesting just because I'm trying to establish this differentiation between worth versus value. And I think a lot of these guys will understand the difference between those two terms as they go through this portaling process. How much of what you feel like you see so far has to do with not understanding the difference between those two versus literally seeking just a new opportunity?
Yeah, it's part of it. I mean, again, Nebraska is going to do what they can to keep guys they want around. But like Matt Rhule said, this season, again, he prepped a lot of people for what was coming. Not just when he said there's going to be, a lot of guys lost to the portal because of, this roster attrition and having to cut down. Obviously, some of these guys he's lost, he wouldn't like to lose. But I think a quote people are forgetting, he said he's not going to chase guys because of the way they're treated at Nebraska. And so, there are other programs out there that can throw a money amount or could throw a specific role amount or whatever at a Nebraska player. And they can come back to Nebraska and be like, hey, this is what I'm getting. And Rhule's like, you know what? Go chase the opportunity.
Yep.
Go get the bag. That's just kind of where they're at, because for at certain positions, they think they have enough depth. And at others, it's like, hey, at the end of the day, you have to kind of lean back and fall back on who you are as a program and who you want to be, where no one's above this exception. You can't make an exception for anybody when you're trying to run a program.
Tim, as you, as some news sort of trickles out this morning that Nebraska might be working to bring back Phil Simpson from Florida State as to coach edge rushers, does that mitigate your concern at all about the Terrance Knighton departure, or how does that move your needle?
Somewhat. Simpson's a good recruiter, and seeing that news started to trickle out this morning, I think makes recruiting a little interesting. I think you feel a little better about some of the Florida flavor you have on the roster, especially the young guys, Vincent Shavers, Willis McGahee. Larry Tarver, Amari Sanders. Like the odds of keeping those guys around improve by having Simpson around. Yeah, you feel good about, kind of what he can do with that jack room, with the outside linebacker room moving forward. But I don't think it necessarily impacts that room all that much. I think it helps mitigate from a recruiting standpoint, but I think Nebraska's going to have to go make a splash, I think, to keep that line together and try and replicate kind of what Terrance Knighton was able to do with that room over the last 2 years.
So how do you separate, Tim, in your mind? Because I'm a big Knighton guy. Taking advantage, not taking advantage, but he had some older guys with Nash and Ty, and he had some young guys with like Keona and Van Poppel and Kai. And how do you separate the development from starting with some pretty good ingredients?
Yeah, I think you look at both. You look at the fact that, obviously he inherited a good amount of talent, but that talent hadn't played up to their potential until he got here. Like Ty Robinson kind of put it together this year. So you balance like that top end, hey, he's got all this talent to work with, but also you saw the development of the top end guys, and you saw the bottom come up too. You saw James Williams develop into what he became. You saw Kai Wallen develop into a flash rusher at times. You saw Jabari Butler kind of come into his own. Keona Davis, the strides that he's made this year. You're seeing the real-time development of young guys with potential, and you're also seeing older guys take the steps they needed to take at the tail end of their college careers to take that next leap in their long-term career.
We're talking with Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Tim, as you kind of filter through this, you said you assumed Tony White would be gone, which I think a lot of people did. I think the manner in which he left was more concerning to people than that he actually left. But moving on from his actual departure, what are you looking for in the next defensive coordinator at Nebraska?
I'm looking for something that inspires. I think that's the big thing right now is with the losses and some of the shocking losses up front. I think Nebraska is going to have to make something of a splash to kind of keep that room, to keep that group together, but also kind of make a positive impression and try generate some momentum, generate some positivity. John Butler should be a candidate for this job. I think his resume speaks for itself, and I think he's going to have an opportunity to earn the job. Is he the splash hire necessarily? I don't know, but I think you can mitigate that. Where if you do an internal promotion, I do think you have to go make a splash at the D-line spot or at the secondary spot. Like, I mean, you're seeing what Florida State's doing right now. They got Tony White, they got Terrance Knighton, and you have to imagine some of these guys that have entered the portal are going with them. Nebraska can do the very same thing. They can go find somebody, a D-line coach or a secondary coach, or even a defensive coordinator, someone that can bring some guys with them, because Nebraska needs a little influx of talent right now to mitigate some of the losses they've suffered.
Tim, do you look at Nebraska's prowess or how people feel about them based on whether they get sitting guys or they don't get sitting guys? That seems to be, I was going to say a fan thing, but maybe that's just a thing in general where we equate that to like how good of a hire someone is.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's some element of you have to have some trust in Matt Rhule because he's made good hires, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Like, across his career, I think he's done a really good job there. So, yeah, I mean, there's an element of, I think from a perception standpoint, a sitting guy looks better. But, if you can find like a Butler, Butler was not technically a sitting guy, and overall it's been a good hire so far. He's kind of was dealt a shorthand with what he had to work with in the room, and he's developing the rest of that room together. But I thought Butler was a good hire as a technically not a sitting guy, just a guy technically off the street. I'm interested to see what Nebraska does here because you can go a couple of different directions, and they want to stick with the same defense. They want to stick to certain ideals and rules that Rhule has for that side of the ball, but I think they can afford to be a little creative here.
Hey, if I wanted to pick, I don't know if it's context clues or deductive reasoning, but I don't think you float Phil Simpson or guys like that without having an idea of who you want your defensive coordinator to be. That can't be too much of a reach, can it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, it's his side of the ball. It's the same way with Dana Holgerson basically having control of his side of the ball and wanting to bring his guys in. I think there's a an idea of who the next guy could be based off that.
You think it's a situation where, because if I'm trying to put context clues together, I go, okay, we're looking at defensive assistants here, judging by how Coach Rhule handled Dana Holgerson on the offensive side of the ball. We can maybe assume there's a defensive coordinator that they have a plan for at least.
Yeah.
If we haven't heard a name yet, we assume he's currently coaching somewhere and is a sitting guy somewhere. I mean, are those fair conclusions?
His MO is to not say anything until it's announced.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't usually leak.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, like the fact that this is happening now, like, it's an announcement that could end up happening sooner than we think, just because, there may be a guy waiting that they're just waiting to see what happens this weekend, what happens in the next couple of weeks with bowl games, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to be one of those hires that is interesting, because you also wonder, hey, if it's not John Butler, how does he feel about it? Is he feel slighted by the fact that he came in with the opportunity to get a defensive coordinator spot and then he doesn't get it? Is there going to be, a better working relation between the back end of the defense and the front end of the defense? Is it going to come together where Butler has control of his back five and then the front seven? Because you've seen coordinators do that at a successful level, where the front and the half are different calls and called in differently, but it works together. It just didn't seem to work together this year.
You know what's interesting? I'm listening to you as I'm trying not to beat up my co-host. You know what we haven't asked, but we talk as though we know. There's this weird thing where maybe Coach Butler, after being back in the college game, has changed his sentiment about coordinating, not because he doesn't think that he can do it or would be good at it, but it may take him some time to get back acclimated to talking and coaching people much younger than he's been accustomed to coaching. Maybe he's learning on the fly too.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that because, again, he was on the radio a couple of weeks ago and he was talking about having to kind of not dumb down necessarily, but
talking about the difference between like coaching Micah Hyde and Caleb.
Right, but that's the thing. Like that. I thought that was a good context into kind of his struggle and his, the adjustment between coaching at the NFL level and coaching at the college level. I mean, there is an element of that where, for him, maybe he has an idea of what he hypothetically like to run, but understands you can't really run that with college kids. You can run that with NFL kids or NFL players, And so I think right now, there might be an element of that. I don't think that's not. I think that's certainly on the table. He's a guy that there's also, Damon, you know this too. Like, there's some guys that are just better as position coaches. Like, they are better at what they do with an individual position when they can focus in on a guy, when they can focus in on a group of guys and develop them. Some guys just have that natural knack of developing individual positions. But when you zoom out, and it's a flip side, like Garrett McGuire, I think is the opposite of that. I think that's a guy that you get him on a whiteboard, you get him talking scheme. He's brilliant. He can ride up there with anybody. But when it comes to development and developing players and, improving a position group, I don't think he can do that necessarily at this point in his career.
Tim, it's kind of funny you bring that up because it's something I talk about all the time. Like, the skill sets of a position coach to a coordinator and a coordinator to a head coach are all like pretty different, but somehow
vastly different.
But somehow we've decided that is the career path that you have to take in order to get these jobs in any sport, really. It's kind of funny because we're talking about, like DB said, vastly different skill sets, but we never really consider it's like, oh, maybe Garrett McGuire would just be a better offensive coordinator, not for Nebraska necessarily, but just a better offensive coordinator than he is a wide receivers coach.
Right. And I mean, there's an element of that too. Like, talking to people that are somewhat in the know of McGuire's situation and him coming up and all of that, I really think the best thing in his career at this point and early on is cut your teeth somewhere, man. Like, go to the high school level, go be a high school OC, go coordinate your own offense and cut your teeth and prove, that you can do it, and I think right now, like, he's learning a lot across his career now, going down to Texas Tech, going to be learning from his dad, learning from that offensive staff down there. It's a good offensive staff they're putting together. But that's the whole thing is like, I do wonder a little bit, like, hey, when does he get his shot to call an offense, and what does that look like? Because again, people laud him for his football knowledge, people laud him for his X's and O's ability. We just haven't seen his hand in an offense yet, and his like what it looks like when he's leading something.
When you're taking a look at like proximity to being where Nebraska wants to be in terms of a program, how important relative to that is the defensive coordinator hire?
Yeah. I think it's important. Like, I mean, in my opinion.
Okay, go ahead.
In my opinion, I just think over the next 2 years, you kind of have to capitalize on the talent you have, specifically at quarterback, and some of the young talent you have on the offensive side of the ball. The time is now. There isn't this like, okay, we're bringing in someone and we're going to develop up. This isn't one of those situations. Like, you got to be ready to go.
It feels like they're a good DC hire away from being off and running. That's kind of how it feels to me on the outside looking in, and kind of being on the inside looking out. With a good defensive coordinator hire, it seems like they could be off and running. That's just my feel.
And that would lend itself to the idea of maybe they're going for a sitting guy. Like,
right.
Ready to go.
I mean, does that?
It does, because again, they've been aggressive. You hire again, like, you hire an offensive mind like Dana Holgorsen. He brings his wide receivers coach that's an established recruiter. On the defensive side of the ball, you have multiple staffers now. I mean, hypothetically, again, in the staff, you got John Butler, a guy that could be a defensive coordinator or even a head coach at some point in his career. You've got Rob Dvoracek, a young rising star in the industry. You've got Dackel Shorts, another young rising star in the industry. You have Donovan Raiola, who's done good work over the past 3 seasons. And then you have Dana Holgorsen overseeing the offensive side of the ball. You're right. Again, one splash DC hire. And again, at least on paper, you're looking at a roster and you're looking at a program that is ready to strike.
Tim, before we let you go here, got a few minutes left. I wanted to dive into this recruiting class a little bit, because I know you watch these guys a ton, and you've got a great eye for evaluation, not just from Nebraska guys, but kind of nationally. So I'm curious your overall thoughts on this class. I know you mentioned a couple guys that you think could play early, but your overall thoughts on the quality of this class, and maybe a couple guys that you really like that aren't getting as much attention.
Yeah, I like the quality of the class. I think that there's a good group of top end guys that can contribute early, and then you have a lot of guys at the bottom of this class, quote unquote, the bottom of this class, that you could develop. And I know some people don't really understand that Nebraska's trying to win now, and they see a couple of these guys that are developmental prospects, and they're like, we need win now guys. That's going to come through the portal. But understand that to build a program up, you have to have a balance of developmental prospects and ready to go prospects. And the guys that they took swings on, the guys that are these developmental guys, the Brian Tapus, the Jeremiah Joneses to a certain extent, the Tanner Turches, those guys in the class have high ceilings when you put it together for them. Brian Tapus is a guy that I think, with 2-3 years of real development, if he commits himself to the program and commits himself to his development, that's a guy with future starting tackle ability, future starting O-line ability. Tanner Turch is a guy that I'm curious where Nebraska puts him, because, right now they're talking about him starting on the defensive side of the ball. I kind of like his ability at receiver, and I think Nebraska should give him a shot. I wonder, Dana Holgorsen might recognize that too, watching his film. He's a 6'2" receiver, can explode vertically, can do some of those things you want a receiver to do in this offense, can go up and get the ball, has a lot of natural receiver traits, but does have that versatility on the other side of the ball. I think if you're talking guys that I like more than, I'm bullish on, I think in this class, I like Bryson Weber. I think, a lot of people kind of
long son of a gun, isn't he?
Very long. Yeah. Very long corner, very athletic. And when I talked to him over the summer, he talked about how as a junior, he mainly played corner using his athleticism, didn't really have the instincts, didn't really know, how to develop. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but one of his guardians now is Garyon Conley, the former Ohio State cornerback who's now with the Raiders. I think he's still in the NFL. But Gary kind of took him under his wing over this past offseason, kind of worked with him over the course of the season. And you look at his senior year and you watch some of the stuff and you talk to people in the know down there in Houston that saw him play. He's paired those instincts up really well. And so now he's got instincts to pair with a 6'3" frame, with really good athleticism, with natural track speed, with the ability to kind of sink his hips and flip and turn and run. So I like Weber a lot. I think he's a year or two away, but I think that's a guy that you like to have in that cornerback room that you keep developing. You have guys in the room that also look like him that he could look up to and develop behind. Up front, on the other side of the ball, I like Connor Booth. I'll say that. I think Connor Booth's going to produce at Nebraska more than people realize, just because he did what you want. Yeah, you realize, with a guy like him, like, hey, Class C2, but he produced the way you'd want a Power 4 commit to produce playing Class C2 competition. And I think that matters. And I think seeing him in person and getting an idea of how big he is, how fast he is, and some of the stuff that he can do as a running back, I think he's better than people give him credit for. And I'm talking about a guy that ran for 3,000 yards that I don't think is giving enough credit for what he did as a senior.
Tim, as we kind of talk through this recruiting class, when we talked on Wednesday, you and I in Austin, it appeared as though Jeremiah Jones was not going to end up as part of Nebraska's class. Do you have any insight into how that back and forth went, where Jeremiah ended up signing with Nebraska?
Yeah, and Damon, and I know I was watching that live signing day show, and Rhule was scheduled to come on it. And Rhule was scheduled to come on at a certain point and didn't come on, and I was like, oh, he's on the phone. He's on the phone with Jeremiah.
Bam.
I've dealt with that before.
Crazy 5 hours. You kind of have an idea based on kind of what you just said, but everything from like Knighton to Jeremiah Jones, like just to have the show and know that this chaos is going on was incredible.
Oh, I'm sure. But yeah, it was like again, it was just a last minute effort, like Rhule putting in the effort, 1890 putting in, a little additional help in there too, to kind of keep him calm and keep him committed. And it's a big deal. And I think Nebraska recognizes it's a big deal. Rhule was excited about getting him secured. You see the way, how much love he gets from the coaching staff whenever he visits. And, I don't know long-term where he ends up. They're going to start him on the offensive side of the ball. I think he's going to have a chance to, compete for early playing time because he's a big body receiver. But I think his long-term ceiling, and a lot of people agree, is on the defensive side of the ball, where he could play safety, he could play linebacker. And there's even some people out there that think he can eventually develop into an edge rusher. He's got all the potential in the world. And I think he was a must get in this class, because I truly believe this at like, he's one of the bigger sleepers, not just in this class. I think he's one of the bigger sleepers in the 2025 cycle across the country.
Mm-hmm. Tim Verghese, Inside Nebraska. Great stuff as always, Tim. We appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, TV.
Yes, sir. You too.